This is Cornstalks and Sports Talk, your go-to Iowa-based sports show, hosted by the one and only Elliot Clough.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, PrizePicks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the PrizePicks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on PrizePicks for a first deposit match of up to $100. PrizePicks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
What's up, Cedar Valley, and hello to the Hawkeye State. This is Cornstalks and Sports Talk, your Iowa-based sports show here on AM 950 KOEL and KOEL.com with me, Elliot Clough, at Elliot Clough on Twitter. We got a great show ahead of us today. Andy Rieckhoff from Bison 1660 in Fargo, North Dakota. He's on to talk with us a little bit about the preseason expectations for the Missouri Valley Football Conference, polls, media day, and then Chris Rosvoglou of the Straight Up Saints podcast and Boot Crew Media. He joins to talk with us a little bit about Trevor Penning, the former UNI offensive lineman, getting kicked out of practice at Saints camp just a few days ago. That one's going to be a fun conversation. Definitely looking forward to that. We will talk about this topic we're going to hit in this first segment, and it just seems like we always end up hitting the heavier stuff when it's just me. And, I'm more than happy to do that. I think that's honestly where I thrive in life, and then also when talking sports. I don't feel like I'm necessarily afraid to go at topics that some people might avoid. And now, in all reality, I really do think everybody's talking about this topic. And what it is Deshaun Watson. This one is really big. It's everywhere, all over the sports world. And, the guy hasn't played football in like 2 years. And it's not looking like he might this season too. That's exactly what we're talking about here. And if you don't know exactly what's going on with Deshaun Watson, maybe you're tuning in here to Cornstalks and Sports Talk more for local stuff as opposed to the national, but we will be hitting this right now. Between 2019 and 2021, Deshaun Watson, who was the quarterback for the Houston Texans and largely beloved, he booked 66 appointments with different massage therapists and masseuses, and ultimately there was some level of sexual misconduct. I know that sexual assault is factored into this situation as well, but I don't know the intricacies of this. I'm going to do my best to explain it because there are a bunch of numbers going around in regards to cases and how many women and et cetera, but as of right now, the more recent news, 23 of 24 civil suits against Watson have been settled. There is one remaining. And 30 cases were settled by the Houston Texans as an organization, with women who say that I believe they were negligent towards how the situation was handled. Again, this is a very wide sweeping subject in that it has affected a lot of women. The NFL is getting involved. They had I believe an outside judge handle the whole situation. There's a bunch of numbers thrown around, people who were involved with legal stuff and legality of all that, of that part of the subject. I truly don't know the specifics of it all. What I do know is that clearly there is a case to be had against Deshaun Watson not playing football this season. And if you know any more details regarding this, go ahead and give me a message on Twitter. It's at Elliot Clough, or you can message us on the KOEL app and let us know what you're thinking about this whole thing. There are a lot of moving parts. Deshaun Watson is in trouble for sexual misconduct, sexual assault. That's the bare minimum that you need to know. And with a lot of women, with massage therapists and with masseuses, and there have been massage therapists that have come out in defense of Deshaun Watson as well. So that there's Instagram messages, there's a lot to this. We'll just put it at that. But Judge Sue Robinson was the woman who ultimately had his penalty or his suspension put in front of her for whatever reason. I don't know if there's a tie to the NFL exactly or what that is, but apparently This is what I heard from Rich Eisen, who is one of the greatest sports talk guys. He's got a great show, and he's with the NFL Network as well. He's phenomenal. And he said that in the report or the document put together by Robinson, she just rips him apart and then says, I suggest a 6-game suspension, or this is what should happen. And right when that came out, people everywhere freaked out. And I'm not going to reference Twitter as the main point because Twitter is insane, but Twitter went absolutely nuts. A lot of it was 6 games. That's crazy. And there was a lot of comparison. And that's like, I did the same thing. Like that's totally understandable. I'm going to do that in just a moment here. But it didn't stop at Twitter. I mean, news stations, sports radio shows, TV shows were talking about it everywhere. And it's been, I don't even want to say it's contentious because generally speaking, it appears that those who have talked about it or spoke up about it are against Deshaun Watson being suspended less than 6 games or less. They think he should be suspended for the whole year, if not, double that, what have you. And I've talked some things that have political correlations or connotations here on Corn Stalks and Sports Talk before here on AM 950 KOEL and KOEL.com. And generally speaking, I mean, like there's been no hard evidence that has been brought forward. And when it comes to stuff like that, I generally just side with the judicial system. If you can't provide evidence, then what kind of case do you have, So those were my initial thoughts. Maybe not initial, but one of my first few thoughts. But the thing is with this is like 30 women corroborated and said that they were sexually assaulted by Deshaun Watson. 30. Really? Like I could get that up to 10, I think, but once these stories start to roll out and these women feel comfortable to share their stories, 30? Really? Deshaun Watson claims that, he did nothing wrong. And then the Browns come out and say that he's remorseful. So this is contradictory. It's a messed up situation. And if it's true, Michael Vick served time in jail. Ben Roethlisberger did not. Kareem Hunt did not. I don't believe Ray Rice did either. And Deshaun Watson probably won't either. And Michael Vick was abusive to dogs, and we love dogs. Like the whole dogfighting thing was just ugly, but these are human beings, man. And I'm not getting on the NFL for this. The NFL and our correctional system or our judicial system are two very different things. And for this guy to have allegedly assaulted or had some sort of sexual misconduct with 30 women, that's a big sample size, man. That is a lot of women. And that is a heinous act. And what we're going to do now, I mean, I think comparison is important because we have what we know and now we have this, right? We have this other thing. And that's a way for us as humans to try to gauge how to go about things in the future of what we've done in the past, right? So I mentioned Ben Roethlisberger. He's accused of the same thing with one woman. Suspension was initially 6 games. Moved it down to, I believe, 4. Kareem Hunt kicked a woman in the face and got 8 games suspension. He was also released by the Chiefs and then picked up by the Browns, and he's had a career since. He signed a pretty lucrative contract after that, too. Ray Rice punched his fiance in the face and knocked her out cold in an elevator. And his initial penalty, his initial suspension was 2 games. He was then suspended indefinitely and never picked up again. And the only reason Kareem Hunt and Ray Rice even got those suspensions is because there was video evidence. And when you reference what happened with Ben Roethlisberger, That was one woman. It should never happen even once, really. Like, obviously, right? We're all on the same page with that. What these two men allegedly did should not happen to any women ever. And Deshaun allegedly did this 30 times what Ben did, and the initial suspension is the same. No fine to this guy who just signed a fully guaranteed contract for $230 million, the most lucrative contract of all time in the NFL. Not a single fine, not a dime. This is absolutely bonkers to me. This is absolutely ridiculous. This is an organization that is at the peak of professional sports. You think about professional sports in America, and you think about the NFL. Maybe worldwide, you think about soccer. But the NBA and the MLB don't touch the NFL. Not even freaking close. And this organization has continually showed that they will not step up when their players commit any sort of assault. Sexual, domestic, whatever. Kicking a woman in the face that you don't even know. If I remember that story correctly. And the thing is, it's what the NFL is saying by not penalizing these players. Ray Rice is really the only one who had any sort of long-term consequences for what he did to his fiance. I think they're still married. I don't know. I haven't looked that up. But the thing about that, too, is that he was initially suspended 2 games, not indefinitely, which is insane. He knocked her out cold. And so I'm going to revert back here while talking about this issue of sexual assault, sexual misconduct, and Deshaun Watson and domestic assault, and kind of putting that all together and seeing how the NFL has handled it. What I'm going to do right now is revert back to what I said on a radio show when I was in college when the Kareem Hunt situation happened. And I'm going to say, where is the line? With sexual assault, with domestic assault happening and probably going underreported with these guys in the NFL. And it happening over and over and over again with these high-profile guys. If it's happening like this with the high-profile guys, imagine how little they let it get out with these lower-profile players. And these guys are damn good. Deshaun Watson, beloved by the NFL before this. I mean, he was doing a lot of great stuff in Houston. Kareem Hunt, Chiefs fans love that guy. Ray Rice, he was like part of an anti-bullying thing back when he was in the NFL. And 30 women are accusing Deshaun Watson of sexually assaulting them. And this judge who made the ruling, from what I can tell, the NFL, this is obviously news. The NFL is appealing that suspension. They want more than 6 games. They want it to be indefinite. And what I've heard and what I know is that the NFLPA is probably going to sue the NFL if it's anything more than 12 games. That's what I've heard. I don't know that to be true, but that's the scuttlebutt, so to speak. And so what that says to me is that they're finally starting to realize that they can't keep getting away with this. And I honestly, Deshaun Watson's one of my favorite quarterbacks to watch play football. When he won that national title with Clemson against Alabama, that was one of my favorite moments that I've ever had watching college football. So I'm not happy about this. I mean, for obviously so many reasons, but it's not like I want these guys to get in trouble. I mean, it's just about consequences at this point. But if it's anything less than a year, and again, it hurts me to say that because I want to watch him play football. But there has to be consequences for what you do. And if the justice system isn't going to stand up for these women, you'd think the NFL would at least do something. But if it's less than a year, what that says to me, if his innocence can be proven, I take all this back, right? I'm all for that. Innocent until proven guilty. I know. But what that says to me, if he plays this season in the NFL, maybe even a little fewer than 6 games, who knows what's going to happen, what his suspension will be. But what it says to me is, you're going to keep watching. And that's the thing that's true about America, is we will keep watching football. And I don't know that to be an indictment of who we are as a nation, who we are as sports fans, or who the NFL is. But it sucks. It sucks for these women. It sucks that we sit idly by and let this happen. And it sucks that we're even talking about it. So do with that what you will. If you have any thoughts, maybe you think I'm wrong, maybe you agree with me, you can find me on Twitter. It's at Elliot Clough. I want to hear what you have to say. And, of course, you can message us on the KOEL app, where you can listen to Cornstalks and Sports Talk, as well as AM 950 KOEL and KOEL.com. Don't go anywhere, folks. We're talking with Andy Rieckhoff from Bison 1660 in Fargo, a little bit about the MVFC Media Days and the preseason polls. So stay right here on AM 950 KOEL and KOEL.com for more Cornstalks and Sports Talk. So MVFC Media Days took place this week on Tuesday. Of course, UNI's head coach Mark Farley spoke, and everyone else that leads a team in the MVFC and the MVFC commissioner spoke as well. Now, Andy, is it Rieckhoff?
Rieckhoff. Close.
Rieckhoff from Bison 1660 in Fargo, North Dakota, joining us here on Cornstalks and Sports Talk on AM 950 KOEL and KOEL.com to talk a little bit about Media Days and the MVFC as a whole after we've learned where coaches, players, and coaches, media, and more expect UNI and other schools to finish. Of course, since he's from Fargo, that means he covers NDSUs, but don't get your panties in a bunch, UNI fans. We're going to have a good time. It'll be fun. Just because NDSU dominates UNI, they have more recently. Anyway,
they dominate Andy, a lot of people. So
yeah.
Andy,
first off, thanks so much for hopping on. From your perspective, the league-wide as a whole, what were some of your key takeaways from MVFC Media Days?
Yeah, first off, Elliot, thanks for having me on. Appreciate you having me on the show. And my main takeaways were, from the preseason poll, I had 2 takeaways. One, I think there was a clear top 5 in many people's eyes. There was in my eyes, too. I agreed with most of where everybody was in that preseason poll. I thought that was pretty right, but voters seemed to have a clear top 5. Because after UNI and Southern Illinois were split by 2 points or 1 point, I mean, that's basically splitting hairs. But after UNI, there was like a 70-point drop-off. So there's a clear top 5 of NDSU, SDSU, Missouri State, and then you've got UNI and Southern Illinois. You can probably flip-flop them 4 or 5. And after that, it's kind of a hodgepodge of everybody else. USD, playoff team last year, but 1, a tough schedule this year. And 2, they're kind of that team that shows up 1 year, and then the next year you don't see them for a couple of years until they're really competitive. Same thing with UND. They were a playoff team in the spring, and then last year really struggled in close games, couldn't make it happen. So I think there's a clear top 5 and then kind of a middle pack. And then you've got, the teams where we expect at the bottom right now. And my other takeaway from an NDSU perspective was there's 2 teams in the top 5, not on the schedule for NDSU. They don't face, obviously, Northern Iowa, as I'm sure many of your listeners know, and all of our fans up here in Fargo, which is a little bit of actually like disappointment. Like, we want to face Northern Iowa because it's a physical team. They're one of the teams that plays NDSU tough. Even if NDSU's won a lot of those games, they've been close games or physical games. And our players and fans definitely have respect for what Coach Farley has going down there in Iowa with that program. And then they don't face Missouri State either. So those are 2 teams in the top 5 NDSU doesn't have on the schedule this year. So it's a favorable path for the Bison this year. Still got to go out and win the games, and you still have SDSU, and you still have Southern Illinois. One of those is a road game in Carbondale, but you don't have 2 of the top 5, and that's the way it's going to be. Now with more teams in the conference, next year you add Murray State as well. So get used to that, Valley fans, because it might be your team one year that doesn't face NDSU and SDSU, and you have the other two teams at home, and you got that favorable path. But for NDSU, it's a good conference schedule this year.
Yeah, can't relate for you and I, that's for sure. Every year is just brutal, of course, taking on Air Force first week, Sacramento State third week, and then I don't know how closely you've looked at UNI's schedule, but the last 4 weeks, Missouri State, Southern Illinois, South Dakota State, USD. So
it's a tough one. You don't have the Bison. There's no NDSU.
Right. That is still going to be rough. And of course, NDSU taking on Arizona that third week after they play Drake in North Carolina A&T. So it's not going to be a cakewalk by any means. Of course, like you mentioned, SDSU in there, Southern Illinois, but relatively a pretty easy schedule for North Dakota State compared to what they've had before. One of the things that I'm really looking towards this season for SDSU is them competing with North Dakota State. I mean, that's a knockout, drag out fight every time those two compete against each other. But after Oladokin leaves for the NFL, they got Mark Gronowski back. And of course, Tucker Kraft, who is a giant of a human being. And then you look at the backfield, they've got an all MVFC first team running back, at least in the preseason polls. I really think that there's a chance that they compete for NDSU for that top spot this season.
Oh, there's absolutely a chance. And one of the main factors is they play NDSU really tough. I mean, they've won, I think, 4 of the last 6 or 3 of the last 6 against NDSU. They've played NDSU extremely tough. They kind of have modeled NDSU in a way in terms of rotating defensive linemen and where they've really built their teams up the last few years. For me, with SDSU, it comes down to 2 things. You mentioned they lost some players. I think the main one they lose is actually Pierre Strong, and he was probably the best running back in the country, in my opinion, the last couple of years. But Isaiah Davis is really good. It's more so the depth that's a little bit more unproven at that position because Davis has gotten injured in the past, especially last year when he missed a bunch of games. But it comes down to 2 things for me with SDSU. First off, Gronowski, you mentioned him, great in the spring. Looked really, really good. Reminded me a little bit of Easton Stick with NDSU, actually, with his ability to extend plays, to run, very accurate passer, even though he didn't necessarily push the ball all the way down the field, super often, I didn't think, but very accurate, took care of the football and can do a bit of everything with his legs and with the arm. But is he healthy? Didn't play last year. And now that spring season was a little weird for everybody. Like I mentioned already, UND won or got into the playoffs that year. Just different things happened that didn't happen in the fall. So can he back that up in a fall season where people have a little bit more film on him? And is he actually healthy? How good is he going to be? Obviously, the quarterback position, it all hinges there. And then something that I don't know if everyone's talking about, but is a huge storyline for them, Jason Eck, new offensive coordinator. And he's the head coach out there in Idaho now. And, he gave NDSU some fits. I'll say it. I thought he called a really good game. I thought he had some good schemes. He had some trickery as well. And I know they've got a new man there now that's going to try and keep that same style and the same thing going, but different voice, somebody different calling the plays. That's a big change for an offense that had been really good. So those are the 2 things for SDSU. If they can maintain that offensive success and Gronowski stays healthy, they've got weapons. They've got a great offensive line. The Yankees are great receivers. Isaiah Davis is still a really good running back. And you mentioned Kraft. He might be the best NFL prospect at the FCS level this year going into the season. We'll see how that fares as the season goes along. But they're a good team. They'll absolutely compete with NDSU. The one thing is they compete with NDSU really well. You got some head-scratching losses other ways. Like you and I beat them every once in a while in a game where you're like, it just didn't seem like SDSU showed up physically in that game. Or Southern Illinois comes back from 3 touchdowns down in Brookings to get a win. And they don't close out USD in a game where they had no business being close, and they don't close it out, and they lose that game on a Hail Mary. So the consistency needs to be there. I think they'll get that fixed. But Gronowski, offensive coordinator, that's the big question marks for me with the Jacks.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You made so many great points there, and didn't even really touch the defense. They're always loaded on that end of the football field too. And, when it comes to UNI taking on SDSU, Pierre Strong, you mentioned him. He hasn't looked like the best running back in the FCS when he's taken on UNI. There's so many different things happening there. The other thing that I wanted to address too is expectations are high from 1 to 7 in the MVFC. And that just speaks to the MVFC being the SEC of the FCS, because all these teams are expecting something great this season. Like I said, 1 through 7, that's North Dakota State, South Dakota State, Missouri State, Southern Illinois, Northern Illinois, or excuse me. Oh my God, I can't believe I just did that. Northern Iowa, South Dakota, and North Dakota. And then we heard some rumblings from coaches that, these are guys towards the bottom of the conference. Illinois State, Youngstown State, Indiana State. They expect to be more competitive than they were last year. And you can say all the right things in media day, but you got to put the product on the field. And there are some real bright spots for just about every single team. Obviously, Western Illinois, but there are bright spots for every team in the MVFC.
No, I would agree with you. And that's why it's the best conference in the FCS. Like, there's a team every year that kind of surprises you. And we saw it last year with USD. You get an extra team in the playoffs. How many can they get? Can they get 6 teams in the playoffs this upcoming year? Especially with no JMU, with no Sam Houston. Like, there's a good chance they can. And the Big Sky will have that opportunity too. You might only get 1 CAA team, maybe 2 if Delaware has a good year. But it looks like them and Villanova, unless some team surprises us there. And you're just looking for somebody else to rise up. So the Valley's got a great chance. And obviously the top 5, like I said, have kind of separated themselves. I think those 5 are the clear-cut favorites in the league. But think about Youngstown State last year. They knock off Southern Illinois at the end of the regular season. Who would have thought that could have happened? And I love Jaleel McLaughlin, their running back. He's great. I think Doug Phillips is building something there. Not going to be there this year, but I think they will take some steps forward. And if I'm picking a sleeper team, I'm going to Illinois State. That's where I'm going. And I was very down on them last year, but there were some inner rumblings of just unrest with players and coaches. There were some players that left that program that seemed like there was some hostility. Now, from speaking with people, they've kind of worked that stuff out. They've got some fresh blood, so to say, in there with the players and some coaching staff. And I think they've worked and smoothed everything over. And their biggest problem has always been quarterback. They haven't had a good quarterback. They've missed on guys, even in their own backyard, that are playing in this conference, with Carson Strong over at USD. But when you think about this team and the quarterback position, they got a transfer from Minnesota and Zach Annexstad, who, maybe he hasn't played a lot, but that's an FBS transfer. Maybe that's the guy finally for them at the quarterback spot. And they've got some talent. They've been good. I know Brock Spack's a good coach, so I kind of like some of the things they've got going there in Normal. And I wouldn't be shocked if Illinois State makes a little bit of a run to be that 6th team possibly in the Valley this year.
Traditionally a very good program last year. And of course the spring, not going their way, but still defeated UNI. Oh, that was an ugly game.
See, anyway, they can do it. They can win those games every once in a while.
They do. And if they string together some level of consistency, especially with a quarterback who has shown that he can be at the FBS level, that's going to be they could definitely surprise some people. Any place in the rankings where you would say, I don't know if that's right? I mean, to me, it kind of looks like the coaches and media got it mostly right with that. You talk about that 1 through 5 being up and above everybody else. And I mean, 6 through 11, it looks good to me there too.
Yeah, I think they got it basically right. I would agree with you. I probably would have flip-flopped UNI and Southern. I think again, it's close. It's only separated by a couple points anyways. 4 or 5, you can make the arguments there. And then I would have put Illinois State at 6. Again, they're my dark horse. They're a team I think I factor some of, when I'm doing a preseason poll, a little bit of their schedule and trying to project a little bit, which maybe isn't the right way to do it. But I look at USD's schedule and it's murderer's row early. They might have to win a game at Montana to really have a good chance of making the playoffs and making a run. Whereas Illinois State, I think they can sneak under the radar a little bit more. And I do like some of the things they got going there. That's probably the only, kind of flip-flops I would have had, but they got it basically right, in my opinion.
Now, in reference to NDSU, since that's the team that you've got, of course, UNI and the Bison, like we mentioned, they don't play each other this year. But any big changes for NDSU that you're looking towards that the Bison will have to face this season?
Yeah, I mean, there's not as many. That's one of the reasons they're picked at the top of the Valley and the top of the FCS this year. In a lot of those preseason polls, they have a lot of returners. Last year was not that way. There was a lot of changes last year, but that means that this year there's not as many changes. So, they're loaded at running back. They've got 5 guys that played a majority of snaps, not majority, but 5 guys that played a lot of snaps last year at the running back spot. Hunter Lipke, number 1 among those guys, fullback, running back guy on the the Walter Payton Award watch list to start the year, and he's phenomenal. He can catch the ball out of the backfield, and he can also run through you. Did so in the national championship game. You got to replace Cordell Volson, who was an NFL draft pick by the Bengals on the offensive line, but they've got 4 or 5 guys that could have started there last year. There's so many guys at NDSU on the offensive lines, so that won't be a problem. There are only areas where you kind of look at maybe there being a question mark would be wide receiver. You got to replace Christian Watson, who second-round pick by the Packers, one of the most explosive athletes this program's ever seen. That's not an easy task to replace, but NDSU, they don't really throw it a whole lot. Like if they need to, they can just run it and throw the tight ends. They've got Noah Gindorf back at tight end, who's a phenomenal player there. And they've got some receivers too. Phoenix Sproles has been in this program for years. He's really good. I know you can say, oh, the stats aren't good, but again, stats for receivers at NDSU just aren't usually there because of the lack of opportunities. And, I've been here for 8 years now. I've never seen a wide receiver room with as much talent. They've definitely got talented guys. Now, does that translate onto the field? We'll have to wait and see. But they've got some youngsters that are freshmen and true freshmen. Trey Lance's younger brother, Bryce Lance, is a receiver for NDSU that has a bright future, I think, too. And they got a couple other younger receivers, and Raja Nelson going into his second year of getting playing time. DJ Hart as well. Braylon Henderson's been on the field. So they've got some experience there, but it's not Christian Watson. And then the other spot is linebacker. They've got to replace Jackson Hankey, who was a staple of the defense for years at middle linebacker. And that spot is the quarterback of the defense for NDSU. It's a very important spot for the defense. They got Luke Wirtz from Batavia, Illinois, who hasn't started yet, but was a big-time recruit when they got him. He's dealt with a lot of injuries. A lot of them. Missed basically all of last year with an injury, but they have him healthy right now. Going to try and keep him healthy. And that all the coaches say the light bulb has kind of come on for him. This is the third year. After the third year in the program, it typically happens. That's where it's at now for him. So he's got a chance to take over that spot. It will be a little bit of a battle with him and Nick Kubitz, and then outside linebacker as well on the right side of the middle linebacker there. Another opening as Jasir Cox transferred at the end of last season. Got a few guys that will compete there. A former safety, now kind of turning linebacker, and Julian Wadarchik, who is a really, really good, talented player in that position, has a lot of coverage responsibilities. So he fits that really well. And he's like a 6'3" safety linebacker hybrid guy. And then Oscar Benson, a young guy from the state of North Dakota as well, that has impressed the coaches a lot. So linebacker, receiver are really the two things that are up. Quarterback's not. Quarterback's been a question mark for 3 seasons, basically. Trey Lance's year was a question mark. The spring season was a question mark. And last year, it was a question mark between Cam Miller and Quincy Patterson. This year, it's not. It's Cam Miller's job, and that's a refreshing change for the coaching staff, I'm sure.
He is Andy Rieckhoff, and you can't say he doesn't know anything about NDSU football. That's for sure.
Some try.
He, like I said, Andy Rieckhoff from Bison 1660 in Fargo, at Andy on the AM on Twitter. Go give him a follow. Andy, we appreciate you hopping on, man.
Appreciate you having me, Elliot. Looking forward to more conversations.
All right, folks, don't go anywhere. We got that third and final segment coming up here on Cornstalks and Sports Talk. Chris Rosvoglou from BootCrewMedia.com and the Straight Up Saints podcast joining us to talk about Trevor Penning, former UNI offensive lineman, getting kicked out of Saints practice this week. Don't go anywhere. We got more Cornstalks and Sports Talk coming up on AM 950, KOEL, and KOEL.com.
Former UNI offensive lineman Trevor Penning was the first ever first-round draft pick out of the Panther football program, going 19th to New Orleans Saints this spring. He has made his presence known at OTAs, that is for sure. And now on to talk with us a little bit about it here on Cornstalks and Sports Talk on AM 950, KOEL, and KOEL.com is Chris Rosvoglou from the Straight Up Saints podcast and my old stomping grounds, Boot Crew Media. Chris, I got your last name right, didn't I?
You did. You got it right, Elliot.
Let's go. 1 for 2 today. I got our other guy. I pronounced his last name wrong. But anyway, Chris, thanks for joining, man. It's good to get on a podcast with you. We never did that when we were both a Boot Crew.
I know. It's actually wild how, even though we were there for the same time, our paths never really crossed because of the way the Saints and Pelicans were kind of going in 2 different directions. But I'm glad to kind of chop it up with you now, man.
Yeah. So Trevor getting kicked out of practice, that was all over the headlines in New Orleans media yesterday, a little bit up here in Iowa too. What do you make of it? Are you concerned? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm not really concerned yet, right? This is a player who, when the Saints drafted, they knew that he had an aggressive nature to him. And honestly, that aggressive nature to him is also kind of his strength at the same time. That's what makes him such an appealing prospect coming out of Northern Iowa. A lot of people like that aggressive nature because you are in the trenches. There's going to be chippy times, from here and there. So that's not an issue for it. The Saints really, this is kind of their first way of reprimanding him. He had an early scuffle with Peyton Turner, which if you go back and look at the footage, wasn't really his fault. It was just they were getting aggressive. Peyton Turner actually kind of threw the first blow, and then it kind of escalated from there. The second time around, it was him and JT Gray. JT Gray kind of pushed Trevor Penning when he wasn't looking. He took an exception with that and kind of escalated from there. And now the third time, he actually wins the rep against Malcolm Roach. They go into the floor. Malcolm Roach doesn't like that he kind of played through the whistle completely, and it carries over. That one is where the Saints said, okay, enough's enough. They kicked him out of practice. And a lot of people talked about it. You mentioned, it really generating some buzz. And, I think the early reaction for some people is, hey, is Trevor Penning too aggressive? Is he going to be a problem in the locker room? I haven't heard anything of that nature yet. It's way too early. I mean, he's still just through 10 days of training camp. So it's way too early to jump to conclusions there. I'm more fascinated, though, in seeing how does he respond to that, right? Like, this is the first time that Trevor Penning's been told, hey, some things just can't fly. We love the aggressive nature, but you got to know when to kind of just turn off the switch just for a little bit. And how he responds to that, in my opinion, that's going to be important. And then how does he play during a game environment, right? I think for now with his teammates, you probably want him to dial it down a little bit less. And he'll probably do that over the next couple of weeks. Again, he's just a rookie. He's learning. But how does he go in a game environment against opposition where things are going to get chippy? There's always a guy who kind of throws a hand, and then the second guy always gets blamed. That's a popular theme in the NFL. So I'm curious to see how he handles that part. But I'm not really worried about it yet. I don't even really at this moment anticipate him starting week 1. I do think it's James Hurst's job for now. And as Trevor Penning progresses, the Saints will evaluate it and hope that he turns into the franchise left tackle for years to come, which is possible with his skill set. So not overly concerned. Don't think he's considered some type of problem child in the locker room. He's just going to have to learn. But as the Saints said, they'd rather him be aggressive and learn when to pull the reins back than to sit there and be like, man, you have to be aggressive, because if you don't really have that fiery nature in you, it's kind of hard to instill it. So I think the Saints are just trying to figure that balance out.
First of all, I'm on the exact same page as you. I got an article up on the KOEL website talking a little bit about it. And there are a few things that I addressed. Is one, these guys who are fighting back and essentially starting the fights, they're professional football players, so their egos are through the roof. Like they obviously don't want to get beat by a rookie the way that some of them got beat by Trevor Penning. And two, too aggressive in the National Football League. Like I get it, like penalties, right? But really, this guy's a rookie. He's gonna figure it out. And thirdly, personally, I've interviewed Trevor a couple times. Nicest guy off the field. Obviously, you don't want to mess with him on the field. His teammates are going to love him, and they loved him here at UNI. He's like I said, a big teddy bear off the field. So, in regards to the teammates and stuff like that, how are these guys responding? What are the thoughts from some of the other guys on the roster in New Orleans?
Yeah, look, I mean, no one has come out and been like, "Oh, we can't take this. This is egregious." This is just one of those. To your point, it's a football thing, right? You're in training camp. You finally got the pads on, which just came on this past Monday. So that guys are, amped up more than usual. No one has really taken this incident and been like, okay, he went too far. He did that. He's just a rookie. He's learning. Dennis Allen did say, though, it's a matter of, and this isn't just for Trevor, this is the whole team, kind of stopping it now while you can and knowing when you shouldn't cross the line, because at the end of the day, the Saints have goals as a team, and those high aspirations they have, they won't be met if they're constantly chirping back and forth. But to your point, this is why I was never concerned about Trevor Penning, and why I actually don't think any player has come out and said anything yet, nor will they in the future, is that aggressive nature of his, like you just mentioned, and people talked about it in the Senior Bowl so much. It's a different guy in the room when you're not on the football field. And I think for the Saints offensive line, guys like James Hurst, who have talked about kind of taking him under his wing and being able to play alongside him, they've had no issue with Trevor. So I'm not worried about that in the slightest. I think that goes to what you're talking about, his calm demeanor when they're not on the football field. But Dennis Allen did kind of make it clear, though, that he'd like to see them figure out that balance. And I think that will come over time. I think when your head coach kind of tells you, hey, we don't do that here, you'll learn because it's the NFL. And to your point, you got to adjust. And if you don't adjust, then you don't see the field. And guys like Trevor Penning definitely want to see the football field. So I haven't heard any complaints at all yet. Haven't really heard anything, let's say, overly positive yet because it's still early in training camp. Trevor's got to earn that job coming from a school where, look, it's not considered in Alabama that they're plug and play. But, man, the Saints know he has a lot of potential. So no negative aspects so far from the locker room.
The other thing, too, it's like that guy's on our team. Like that's great. We don't want him on another team because he'd be doing that to our guys come actual football season. And knowing Trevor to a degree, I think part of it is proving, hey, this is why you picked me. I'm not messing around here.
Yeah, it's possible. And look, all these plays are kind of after the whistle. And that's why fans are concerned because fans are like, hey, what if it's a game and it's a 15-yard penalty? And I totally get all that. But until that really happens, I think we're kind of jumping to conclusions. And then second part, a lot of this happens in camp. And I talked about it on Twitter with a couple of people. Fred Warner and Brandon Ayuk, two really impact players on the 49ers. They squared off not once, but twice in the same practice. I didn't hear anything about that. And I'm not saying you should hear about it, right? And people should make a big deal. It's training camp. Every single team is going to have at least one scuffle, probably every practice, because these guys are amped up and they're ready to face a different team. They don't really want to go up against their guys all the time, but when you're seeing the same player every single day for about a month straight, something's going to happen. It's just human nature. So I think to your point, if he finds a way to kind of play with that aggressive nature and obviously know how to not cost his team with penalties, and that's going to be the balance they find, the Saints are absolutely going to love having a guy on their team like that. And just think about this. When you draft offensive linemen, you kind of want them to put their bodies on the line for their quarterbacks. You know that's not going to be a question with him. And I'll throw this out here too. The Saints fan base, which obviously one of the best fan bases in the NFL, they've gone in on their offensive linemen before for not being aggressive enough. So being too aggressive is almost like a little bit of a change of pace for them. It almost seems like a double standard a little bit. So I'm really not worried. I think that if it gets to the point where, let's say he's playing as a rookie and penalties are coming through the roof, then we can assess it. But I just think it's way too early for people to kind of spam that panic button.
In regards to that, one of the main questions that I got when I was first doing interviews with New Orleans media about Trevor was, hey, penalties look like they're an issue. What's going on? At the FCS level, Trevor was too good. That was the problem. He was just mauling guys and getting unnecessary roughness penalties like game after game because he was too good. I don't think that's going to translate to the NFL. So for anybody who's listening and is a Saints fan, there's that. But right now we're talking with Chris Rosvoglou from the Straight Up Saints podcast and Boot Crew Media about Trevor Penning and the New Orleans Saints. And now a lot of questions that I got about Trevor when we were doing some of those interviews too around draft time were regarding if he was going to be able to step in and play left tackle right away. I said, I don't think so. Not right away. He's got to do some learning. And it sounds like that's the case that you're seeing so far too.
Yeah, James Hurst has been the guy taking the first team reps at left tackle. And that seems to be like that will be the week one starter. It would take either a crazy stretch of a month in terms of Trevor Penning putting together great practice after great practice, but also playing well in the preseason. And that is possible. But I think for people who might be worried about that and be like, hey, if he's not starting week one, what's up there? James Hurst is a player who started 15 games for the Saints last year because they were so depleted on the O-line. And that allowed him to get more familiar with Pete Carmichael's system. That allowed him to kind of build that confidence and trust and chemistry with an Andrews Pete, with a Ryan Ramczyk, with a Cesar Ruiz and an Eric McCoy. So there's that familiarity level there. And for people who maybe are concerned about that, James Hurst isn't just a player who's been reliable for the Saints. Before he went to New Orleans, he was a trusty starter on the Baltimore Ravens. Like every year he was in that lineup playing a big role. So this is a guy that at this point in his career, he's 30 years old. He's considered, I guess, still in the prime of his career. There's no shame in Trevor Penning having to wait and kind of earn that starting job. There's no issue with that. And the Saints knew that when they took Trevor Penning. If they really thought that, hey, we need a left tackle right now, then I think the Saints might have traded up to maybe acquire a different left tackle that they think they can plug and play right now. But they like what they have in James Hurst for the present. And more importantly, they love what they have in Trevor Penning for not just the 2022 season, but 2023 and beyond. So I don't anticipate him being the week one starter, but him not being the week one starter wouldn't in the slightest change my opinion on him, nor would it change what the Saints think about him potentially and what he'll bring to the table for many years to come.
Definitely got some technical things to work on. That's for sure. You watch some film from Trevor, but the thing is, and the thing I've said before is Trevor came in and when he was on his recruiting visit and he got his one offer, his only D1 offer from UNI, he was wearing a Kickers jersey and he proceeded to gain 100 some pounds and become a first round draft pick. So I definitely expect Trevor to put that work in and figure some of that stuff out sooner rather than later. Now, for the Saints as a whole, Chris, for expectations regarding the team surrounding Trevor Penning, because obviously I think some fans in Iowa and specifically the Cedar Valley are now going to be rooting on the Saints. What are your expectations for New Orleans going into this season? Jameis Winston coming off this ACL tear, Michael Thomas back now, Chris Olave adding to the wide receiving group. What are your expectations?
Yeah, I mean, on paper, this roster is good enough to be a playoff caliber team, right? And for all the reasons you mentioned, you bring back Michael Thomas, who's an offensive player of the year caliber receiver when healthy. You bring in Jarvis Landry, who, when healthy, really good veteran receiver, makes a lot of plays over the middle. You bring in Chris Olave, a first-round pick out of Ohio State, who's supposed to be kind of that home run hitter for this offense. And, you know, we talked about Trevor Penning before. Who knows? Maybe Trevor Penning joins this lineup earlier than expected, and all of a sudden he's a mauler in the run game. That helps that kind of portion of their offense. You look at the defensive side of things. You bring in the Honey Badger, Tyrann Mathieu. That should bring an impact to the defense. You bring in Marcus May for the New York Jets. He should help out for sure. And the Saints are expecting year 2 leaps from guys like Pete Werner, Paulson Adebo. So the talent's there. There's just really 2 questions. Is Dennis Allen ready for that jump that you take from going from defensive coordinator to head coach? And is Jameis Winston ready to be the reason the Saints win games? And what I mean by that is I feel very confident right now to say the Saints can win football games with Jameis Winston. They were 5-2 with him as a starter last year. And if he doesn't go down, this is probably a playoff team. So I think there is confidence there that, hey, with Jameis, we can be a playoff team. My question is, can they win certain games because of him now? Can he be the reason that you look at a division game and let's say the Saints win 31-28 and you say, man, without those throws from Jameis, we're not winning the game. Things like that nature. You know, what's kind of the ceiling for a player like him? Because he's in that interesting position where, yeah, has he panned out relative to his draft position? No, but the talent is still there. The belief is still there. And this is a guy who people are rallying around. I mean, Jarvis Landry said he signed with the Saints because he wanted to play with Jameis Winston and he likes his leadership qualities. So I think there's no question in my mind that if this team's able to reach their full potential, this is a playoff team in a relatively weak NFC. And this is a team that we've seen play really well against the Buccaneers, who people consider a Super Bowl contender. We've seen them play well against Aaron Rodgers and the Packers, which is another, considered Super Bowl contender. So the real question is, are Dennis Allen and Jameis Winston ready for prime time? And if they are, this is a team that I think will do some damage in the NFC.
If you follow Boot Crew Media on Twitter, which you should, they definitely believe Jameis Winston is QB1. That's for sure. Last thing for you, Chris, before we let you go. I talked a little bit about Deshaun Watson in the first segment of the show. And from what I've gathered, I think just about everybody's on the same page. This is the word that comes to mind immediately off the cuff is strange, because 30 women, right? 30 women making these accusations. And the same thing happened to Ben Roethlisberger, however many years ago that was, and it was one woman. And now we're getting the same level of expected games where he'll be suspended. Kareem Hunt happened however many years ago. That was on video, 8 games suspended. Now here we are with Deshaun Watson, who I think largely was perceived to be a pretty good person up until now. And now he's with the Browns. The games, it looks like it's going to be 6 games, but the NFL's appealing. What do you make of all of it?
It's, for me, I have 2 kind of thoughts on it. My first thought is it makes this situation linger and probably makes it even worse for the women who are involved in this, because the longer this appeal process goes on, if this ends up going to court, that's just another day that they have to relive what they allegedly said they went through. And that obviously, hurts to think about. And then the second thing for me is, for the NFL, this is an opportunity for them to finally get something right in terms of suspension, right? You mentioned Ben Roethlisberger, although his was technically classified as sexual assault, compared to sexual misconduct. To your point, it was one individual case that they marked down as a 6-game suspension, then got knocked to 4 games when it got reduced. A lot of people are making comparisons, and I get it. That kind of comes with the business of a situation like this. But I feel like when they, with all these comparisons being made, we're almost losing sight of what's at stake here. And with Deshaun Watson, and you mentioned people thinking the world of him. Everyone did think the world of him coming out of Clemson and what he did early with Houston Texans. Everyone loved Deshaun Watson. And there are still people who will to this day defend Deshaun Watson and support him. And that is, their right to do so if they want to. But when the Houston Texans personally settle with 30 women, and when 24 women file lawsuits, and Deshaun Watson said he will never settle because there's no wrongdoing, but then settles with 20 of the 24 women, something doesn't add up there. And then furthermore, which just really makes this situation even more frustrating, is he got a 6-game suspension, but the disciplinary officer who handled his ruling said that his behavior was, in quotes, egregious, and he committed what confuses me, nonviolent sexual misconduct. I don't understand how that really classifies as nonviolent, but in the 16-page ruling, that's how she wrote it down. And yet you hear that, and he only gets 6 games. And people equated that to, which was really, upsetting to hear, is a quarter per women who accused him, which is just really, sad to think about. And this isn't about having some personal vendetta against Deshaun Watson when people are asking for a larger suspension. This is for them wanting the NFL to take a stand on, truthfully, a subject the NFL has been really poor at when it comes to disciplining their players, whether it's domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual misconduct. They usually give out lighter suspensions than they should. And now that they are appealing, it's been reported that they're going for an indefinite suspension, which could be a year, could be more than a year. And it's worth noting that the NFL's going for this after Deshaun Watson turned down a chance to accept a 12-game suspension, which is what he was offered. He was offered 12. He rejected it. Then he got fortunate enough to get only a 6-game suspension, but that's not going to last. He will get suspended more than 6 games when this is all said and done. And this is, a consolation prize at the end of the day, because this is a player who, despite all the, disturbing allegations around him, received a $230 million contract that was fully guaranteed. So people will not feel bad if he misses a full season. And frankly, it almost feels like it's still not enough, because he did get rewarded and he did get to kind of choose which team he was going to go for next, as a bunch of teams courted him this offseason. So it's an unfortunate situation, more so frustrating situation. And this is a chance for Roger Goodell to finally get something right in this particular category, and B, send a message to women that do watch the NFL that you actually do care about them and they actually aren't an afterthought. Because right now, if Deshaun Watson only misses 6 games after everything he's been accused of doing, what kind of message do you send to women who are NFL fans? So that's kind of where I'm at with this.
He is Chris Rosvoglou. I almost messed it up. Chris Rosvoglou. He knows what he's talking about. Great stuff. Straight Up Saints on all podcasting platforms. He's from Boot Crew Media. Chris, we appreciate you, man. Great stuff as always. He is at Rosvoglou Report on Twitter. Thanks so much for hopping on, man.
Thank you for having me, Elliot.
And that's going to do it for this week's episode of Corn Stalks and Sports Talk. Thanks so much for tuning in, folks. If you missed any part of today's show, you can always listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please subscribe, leave a rate and review. That does help us out a lot. And if you missed either of the guest interviews, you want to see those on YouTube, you can find them there. Just search Elliot Clough and you will see them. Again, thanks so much for tuning in today. My name is Elliot Clough. I'm a UNI insider for Town Square Media. You can find me on Twitter at Elliot Clough. And this was another week's episode of Corn Stalks and Sports Talk.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, PrizePicks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the PrizePicks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on PrizePicks for a first deposit match of up to $100. PrizePicks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy.